Hey listeners, welcome back to the Finding Phil podcast. My name's Phil Hendrick. I'm your host. Well, I tell you, I missed you all a lot last week. I'm very sorry I didn't have an episode for you. I was already going to be running behind. I knew I wasn't going to be able to put out an episode by Thursday last week. And I had plans to just go ahead and get it taken care of over the weekend and just turn in something late. Well, Friday, I ended up going into the doctor in the morning for an infection in my thumb. And it was something like, all right, it didn't look good under the thumbnail. All right, I better get some antibiotics for this. And, well, long story short, I left with a really heavy prescription of antibiotics, which I took my first dose around lunchtime and my second dose at bedtime around 9:30. By 1 in the morning, I was on my way to the ER. I had such a terrible reaction to the medication. It had me balled up in the fetal position over the weekend, literally crying and moaning and asking my wife to pray for me. I was miserable, and of course she was very gracious and took care of me really well and did pray for me. And so my whole weekend was shot. And as a matter of fact, I felt like I was 100% by Tuesday. And but still, even though I felt like I was 100%, my head game isn't there. It hasn't been there. So, but I do have something, and I had something rolling through my head last week that I wanted to talk about. And so we're going to talk about that today. And that's really, how are you coping? I mean, there's a lot going on in the world. I mean, and of course, there's every meme you can think of to back it up, with how 2020 has been going. What's next? Giant meteor, aliens, super volcano. I'm sure you know what I mean. It makes for a good meme on social media because it gives us that feeling like, yeah, what's next? Well, the truth is we all have to have a way to cope. So we're going to talk about that today. And before we do, I want to say thank you again for being a faithful listener or viewer on YouTube. And I appreciate those of you that have reached out. Especially those of you that have reached out with a personal message. It's encouraging me. It's motivating me. It's helping me continue to just want to try to put out content for you. I'm leaving it up to God to make the content good, and I'm also trusting that God's going to bring good guests onto the show as well. I do like how I'm poised to have some return guests like Buck. And possibly one of the other ministry leaders from my CR group. And, I think that's going to be good. But I'm praying for inspiration, motivation, and maybe some divine intervention when it comes to getting other guests out here or on the show. Maybe people I have never even met before. That would be awesome. So we'll see how that goes. So continue to encourage me through messages, through comments, through shares on social media. Even a personal email is great. You can email me at findingphilpodcast@gmail.com. And I'd love that, and I'd like to correspond, even if we've never talked or met before. Wouldn't mind connecting with you that way as well. So, thank you again. Without further ado, let's get on into the episode. Okay, so this week, actually for the last week and a half, we've had some extra events, newer than the COVID-19 coming up. And I actually really, last week when I was trying to prepare for the episode that never happened last week, I actually even toyed around with the idea of talking about racial insensitivity. And my wife steered me away from that wisely, because this is a recovery podcast, but it is also a self-discovery podcast. And and trying to identify ourselves in Christ Jesus and who God meant us to be. And so I really thought we could talk about it in that light. But I really think I will say this, I encourage the discussion. I really encourage you having discussions with people about this. That's something that I wasn't really willing to do too much in the past when we had other events that involve Black Lives Matter, for various reasons. And like I said, I'm not going to get into the reasons why we're not going to discuss that on this podcast. I mean, I'm going to just simply say I listened to the wise counsel of my wife, and she had some good reasons behind it. And the more I thought about it, the more I really just thought what I felt like I had more to share about would be coping mechanisms. Everybody has coping mechanisms. Some of us grow up in our childhood. We learn, whether it be from our parents or we just learn through just our natural bent on how to develop coping mechanisms that are healthy and productive. I would say people that are really healthy and productive in their coping they're doing things like exercise. They're doing things like reading. They're doing things like prayer and meditation. They're doing things like having good discussions with people that are really close to them to work out issues that they're trying to cope with. And those of us, though, that are in recovery, we kind of miss that a little bit. There was something that maybe by no fault of our own, there was a little short circuitry happening in our biological makeup, in the brain chemistry. Maybe we've had some actual traumas in our lives that prevented us from developing a normal or healthy coping mechanism. We all cope. We all figure out how to cope. Some of us cope by just not coping at all. Like, okay, shut it off. The classic analogy of the man that likes to compartmentalize things. He can only process so much at once. So he's, okay, that happened here. That's going in that room, or that's going in that little file folder for now. We'll bring that out later. Or maybe we'll just stuff that folder in the far back part of that file drawer and forget that it's there. Some people cope by trying to make the experience that they're trying to cope more enjoyable. We dull it. We try to possibly even enhance it. All right, let's make a joke about it, if that makes sense. So whereas it could be a serious issue in your life, but you found that it's easier to deal with the suck by laughing about it or making jokes about that. And that can feel like even a healthy coping mechanism to an extent, until you start making jokes or taking too lightly a death in the family. Or when, you've hurt somebody really close to you. And if you take that too lightly by making it a humorous situation, then we can see that wasn't necessarily a healthy coping mechanism. We could be trying to cope. Of course, there's the classic, user and abuser of substances or alcohol. We just want to dull it. We want to stop feeling. I heard it. I told you all that I've been tuning into Brene Brown, and I have listened to her Netflix special, and I have tried. I really like the Netflix special. I liked her most popular TED Talk. I've watched a couple of the TED Talks. I've tried tuning into her podcast, and I'm okay with it. Just depends on the guests that she has. because her podcast episodes are really more about the guest, which they should be. I mean, that's the way that podcast has been structured, and so that that I've just taken with a grain of salt. Some of the episodes I'm digging, some of them, not so much, but. It's worth checking out. But anyways, I think it was her that was telling me, and it could have been a different source. I'm not sure. Even if she said it, I'm sure it's not an original phrase. But I heard that when the addict uses a substance to dull the pain or dull the feeling or numb that feeling, they're numbing all of their feelings. So when you develop a habit of drinking to cope with emotional situations, things that would stimulate a lot of negative emotions, stress and anxiety, or even anger, well, you're basically numbing all of the feelings, though. The good feelings, the feelings of joy, to be able to spend time sitting around the dinner table with 3 of your kids. The joy of, some people have dulled themselves so much that they just don't even really experience the sexual relationship with their spouse the way God intended. And that is to be really full of emotion. It's not intended to be just a physical gratification. So that is also a way that you're numbing. You're numbing yourself from the good feelings as well as the bad. So, we've talked about the people that just want to compartmentalize to cope, maybe take it lightly to cope, make a joke out of it. The addicts that want to numb it or dull it, medicate it. Feel free to comment on this. Feel free to message me back. If you see this post on social media, go ahead and comment there, or, go ahead and feel free to shoot me an email, because maybe we can do a follow-up to this, and maybe we can bring this into a two-person discussion, and maybe one of my guests and I could talk about these. But feel free, if you've got some coping mechanisms that you can think of that maybe I'm not mentioning. And we can maybe talk about them further. But I do challenge you to recognize what your coping mechanism is. I still have coping mechanisms. I'm learning to be more aware of it, and when I'm most likely to be going towards a coping mechanism, a potentially negative one. And right now, I would say that my device is a huge coping mechanism for me. I think it has been even before I quit drinking. I think the iPhone or whatever your smartphone might be in social media. Now, that's not to say that social media is all bad, or that your device is all bad, or that it's bad to take a few minutes when you're sitting on the loo with nothing better to do. It's not to say that that's necessarily bad. But when it comes to where, in every situation where you just don't want to deal with being in a quiet place where you might start thinking about things that bring on anxiety. I'm really speaking personally here. That might, be something that you really want to be praying about. Talk to your sponsor about, bring up to your counselor, bring up in your small group share. Get these things out in the open. Identify them. As soon as you start identifying them, it's not something that you're identifying as to feel guilt or shame. It's something to say, okay, I just want to bring something into the light, because the light will start to expose, and you'll just start to see things a little bit more clearly when you bring it up, and when you share it with people, when you confess it to God, it brings it into the light. In John chapter 3, this is a very loose paraphrase, maybe I can look it up while we're talking, but it does say, it talks about that how man hated the light because it exposed their evil deeds. In John chapter 3, verse 19, it says, "This is the verdict. Light has come into the world, but people love darkness instead of light because their deeds were evil. Everyone who does evil hates the light and will not come into the light for fear that their deeds will be exposed." So, I would even say that I've done that with my use of social media. I'll sometimes ignore it because I really don't want to expose the fact that I use it as a coping mechanism. I use it as a way to just dull my mind to the cares of the world. Now, should we be able to do that? Yeah, but in productive ways that we can keep in balance. And for some people, social media they're okay with it and they keep it in balance really well. My wife is one of them. Actually, she doesn't get on social media very much, which just proves that it doesn't have a hold of her. So, but it doesn't have to be that. It could be, of course, we had those first three that we talked about. Of course, eating's another. Oh boy, the Southern comfort food. I mean, there's a reason why Southern food has that term, comfort food. It makes us feel warm inside. It makes us feel okay. And there's a lot of comfort in that. Of course, people look for comfort a lot of time to cope. And if they can't find comfort in productive ways, they can look into comfort in unproductive ways. I'm not an expert on eating disorders or anything like that, so I can't really speak a whole lot of wisdom or detail into that. But we do know that's an area of recovery for people. We were talking about how we can dull ourselves towards the good feelings in our sexual relationship with our spouse. And so, but we definitely can damage those good feelings of sex. And that is definitely a big area of recovery for a lot of men and women, and that is sexual addiction. And that could be through actually with other humans, other people, promiscuous lifestyle. But for so many, especially in the 21st century, it's through pornography. And so what we're doing is we're trying to dull a pain with a good feeling, all these endorphins that are being triggered in our brain when we look at these images on a computer screen. And then, of course, that dulls the pain. It makes us feel good. It makes us, it injects us into that act that we are watching, and we find a lot of pleasure from that. And but unfortunately, what happens, we're dulling our senses to the natural good feeling of having a sexual relationship, a healthy sexual experience with our spouse. So that's a fifth coping mechanism that people can fall into. And once again, like I said, please share some ideas, and we can maybe talk about them more on the show. If there's anything that you'd like to see me do better in these programs with preparation, here's my problem. If I feel like I'm really trying to prepare a lot, I feel like I'm trying to become a teacher. Now, God might be trying to use me as a teacher, and if He is, that's all up to Him. I haven't felt the calling to be a teacher, and I've felt a calling to do something creative, and this podcast is a creative outlet for me. I've been called to do something that's come very naturally to me most of my life, and that's just to share what's on my heart, wear my heart on my sleeve for everybody to see. And so that's what I feel like I've been called to do. So if you feel like you'd like to see these episodes come out a little bit more structured, a little bit better bullet points, which I have had some episodes where I've gotten the bullet points laid out in advance, and maybe I'll review myself, and maybe I'll just see that is the better way to go. But honestly, I struggled a little bit this week, and I felt like I needed to prepare. I knew what I wanted to talk about, but boy, it was really hard for me to get prepared. I mean, here I am I'm wearing my pajama shorts and I'm wearing a tie-dye t-shirt, but I'm getting it done because I don't want to disobey God. Every time I feel like I might be losing steam on this, God gives me some confirmation to keep going with it. And so here I am putting this out there for you this week. It's not a very long episode, but I want you guys to really be thinking about how you're coping. Maybe we can get better into what are good coping mechanisms. What could we be doing instead of dulling the pain? What could we be doing instead of, escaping the pain or compartmentalizing our feelings? What could we be doing instead of medicating the pain? What could we be doing instead of trying to bring comfort through things that could become unproductive? We could start spending more time feeling the pain and thinking through the pain slowly, sharing the pain with God, sharing the pain with others close to us. And as we start to feel the pain, as soon as we start to feel the anxiety and process it in a healthy way, we're going to start feeling the good feelings more. Just the simple bliss of sitting at a table and seeing all three of your kids and your wife sitting there across from you. Whereas in the past, I'd be trying to figure out how to escape possibly that situation because, but I have to do this. I have this to get done, this to get done. And so you're thinking 15 minutes away when if you're just spending the practicing, embracing the moment that you're in, the 15 minutes you have right in front of you, you'll just be better at coping with all things in life, good and bad. So thanks so much. I hope this rambling wasn't too bouncing off the walls. Maybe I should have some bullet points. But you know what? I'll keep listening to my own episodes. I'll keep taking notes on how I could possibly present them to you better. Thank you again. God bless you all. Have a wonderful week. We'll see you next week. Bye.